Good. Okay, this lecture is on the new nation, what happened in the years after the writing of the Constitution, the establishment of the United States of America as an independent nation. So we'll cover what it means to be a new nation, what the first split was, the emergence of political parties, the Federalists and the Republicans, the ongoing displacement of Native Americans on the frontier, and then talking about John Adams, played by Paul Giacomotti there, and the ongoing problems with France in his term as president. So we will start with, first of all, the new nation and Washington's establishment of the new nation as a viable instrument of diplomacy. As Washington established the cabinet system, which we retain to this day, of appointing people to run the federal departments who are answerable to the president. And one of the things that's hard to recreate or understand about why George was admired by his fellows, by his countrymen, by everyone as the finest revolutionary among them. It wasn't just the fact that he was a military man. It was a universal sense that he possessed a character that was incorruptible in some ways. And so George de Man is never well captured in paintings of him. If you look at the painting that we have here of him putting his arm on the Bible to be sworn in as president, he doesn't look very good. But the statuary that was created during his lifetime does give you a sense of the power and the authority that he wielded. And by having that in his character, he helps him make the first government respected by Americans and foreigners alike. Napoleon, who had a pretty high opinion of himself, said in 1799, when George died, "There goes the passing of the greatest man in history." The greatest man in history was how Napoleon described Washington. And it's pretty amazing to kind of take note of the fact that even during his lifetime, George was looked at as an extraordinary leader. And by putting down the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794, he demonstrated that the new nation would enforce the laws, would require people to pay taxes that they felt were unfair, but the authority of Washington made the taxes more palatable as he was very much respected in the nation. Okay, in Washington's second term, really during his first term too, the world began to be divided into Federalists and Republicans. Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of Treasury, the fellow who believed in an activist national government, was the leader of the Federalist Party. And Thomas Jefferson was the leader of the Republicans. He was Secretary of State. He headed up the State Department, which deals with diplomatic affairs. So these two advisors to Washington became the leaders of political parties. And Hamilton kind of set the tone by his report on the public credit, which wanted to have states fund the national debt at full face value, both the national debt and the state debt. Whatever was owed as a result of the war years should be paid off at face value to establish credit. And this was popular among people that still held the original bonds and things. But most of the time, there was a big boon economically to speculators and rich people. And Hamilton rode roughshod over states like Virginia that had paid their debts. So this report on the public credit led to the Bank of the United States, a bank that was a public-private partnership of the mercantilist model. A high tariff was proposed, but not necessarily enacted. There was a fairly low tariff enacted for revenue purposes. And in foreign affairs, Hamilton favored England, and Jefferson in the 1790s favored France. And this split between England and France helped to reinforce the party identities that were trying to take shape. So Hamilton believed in a loose construction of the Constitution, that if it's implied in the Constitution, the federal government can do it. Whereas Jefferson believed in a strict construction of the Constitution, one in which the Constitution has to explicitly state the powers that the government had, and therefore it can only do what is laid out for it. The Northeast, the merchants, the market-oriented farmers tended to be Federalists, and the small farmers who were not in the market per se, the majority of the country really lined up with Jefferson and his view of strict construction. So those were the parties that were formed in the 1790s. They could agree, the parties, that Native Americans should be kicked off their lands and the frontier open to white settlement. And this map shows the lands that were opened up, that were ceded by the Native Americans in the 1790s and up until 1815 or 10. So that continued apace throughout the 1790s. And finally, we come across John Adams, who's going to emerge as the second president. Ongoing problems on the high seas led to something of a war with the French in the period of Adams's presidency. All the British and the Americans wanted to do was sell goods and buy goods from the Americans, but they wanted to prevent their enemy from doing so. So our stated policy was to be neutral and to trade with everyone, but neither side wanted that. So we had ongoing problems with both sides. In the 1790s, we had problems with France. The XYZ affair was when the French demanded that we pay a bribe to talk with them. We fought a quasi-war with the French in the 1790s that did not turn into a real war, and that was probably good for the country. We didn't need a war with France in the 1790s. we did pass the Alien and Sedition Acts in in Congress to try to make it harder to become a citizen and to make it a crime, literally a crime, to criticize the President of the United States. That was what the Sedition Act said. The Virginia and Kentucky resolutions condemned the Sedition Act and said basically that if a state such as Virginia and Kentucky felt like the federal government was not listening to them, that the states had the right to leave the Union. And so a theory of secession was enunciated as early as the 1790s over the Alien and Sedition Act. So when Jefferson defeated Adams in the election of 1800, it's often called the Revolution of 1800. One party, the Republicans, replaced another party, and without the other party resorting to violence to hold on to power. And so it's called the Revolution of 1800. Okay, what do I ask? Why did they develop in the 1790s? Think about that question and complete the readings, and you should have a good idea. Okay, hope you enjoyed this lecture.